if we look at the graph here, okay, so the brown lines was when I was agitating the coffee on the scale. Okay, now it didn't affect my brew because I didn't have any parameters in sort of dosing by weight on the water volume. But what is useful on here is, I guess, the times at which the pulses came in. So we can see that after the pre-infusion, there was a 30-second bloom before the second pulse. Okay, and pressure-wise, we're not really focusing on pressure because we're more concerned about the flow rate. So the flow rate was a very high flow rate, almost 7 milliliters a second, simply for the agitation, to gain the agitation from the 9 holes on the basket. If we had a slower flow rate, I think we would have seen a less of an agitation. But if we had less agitation, then our expected yield or concentration and strength of the final brew would be a lot less. So the combination of the high flow rate with the holes and the stability of the temperature. So if I look at this temperature line here, okay, now it may look like it is pretty wavy, okay, but if we look at the graph, the dotted line is the desired temperature, and the actual curve is what was being outputted above the outputted in the sensor, basically the sensor which is normally above the puck. Now you will see it going up and down, and this correlates with the flow rate. So when we have a higher flow rate, the stability of the temperature, or the temperature, will generally increase, because that is essentially where the temperature is coming from. It's coming from the water. So we can see it does go above, I can see, so what is the scale here? So it does go above 101.5 degrees C at some points. But when we think about the distance that is from the top of the pour over basket to the surface or the coffee slurry on the top, that space will actually decrease the temperature of the water. So this is one of the reasons why we have such a high temperature on these profiles, in anticipation of that heat loss, and will sort of also signify where the main variable in hand brews comes from, is from the temperature loss. A good example would be if you use a normal kettle and pour into a gooseneck kettle, that pouring into the kettle will take away heat. The goose kettle, if not preheated, will also take away heat, and essentially you're climbing an uphill battle when it comes to heat. So if we look at the variance of the temperatures here, it's not very much. So the variance really is about 2 degrees. So I'm not really sure on what the temperature difference would be on the top of the bed. I'm quite curious to find out. I do have an infrared temperature gun here. I'll see if I can find that in a moment. And maybe on the next brew I'll have a little check. But it would be interesting to see what the temperature is on the when the water is touching the coffee. I wouldn't be surprised if I see maybe a 6-7 degrees temperature loss, maybe even more, especially if the coffee beans are cold, to see what our final brew temperature is. But yeah, something to find out, I guess. I don't know if anyone else knows that, has done their own tests to see on the pour over baskets. I'm not sure. I'd love to find out if anyone has either got a gun as well. Okay, so back to the graph. I think I was mentioning about pressure. So pressure is not really a thing we focus on in this preset. We focus more on the flow rate. So the high flow rate for the agitation and the of the grounds when they're from the holes, and the temperature stability here. On the right hand side, you can kind of see pre-infusion times in different steps, and these can all be programmed in. So it did stop at, what's it say here, 230 the total was 280, and the final brew was 243, if I remember off the top of my head. So 243, so 37 milliliters was absorbed by the coffee, which is about right. We'd expect 2 grams of water to every gram of coffee. So that is a good point to note if you do use the stop at water volume. Okay, you can see it is at 265. The reason it's 265 is I've used this profile a few times, and I've noticed that sometimes it's not as accurate in terms of maybe half an ounce to 10 milliliters. So, you know, I will adjust here, and generally I will get myself quite close to the ballpark. But if you wanted to use your stop at weight, you can also use that, and it is more accurate. But the reason I don't like using it on the preset, on this preset, is because of when I make agitations, it will also affect the data that the DO1 is taking on board. Okay. Also, this is a very important feature. Track water volume. So if you're using the stop at water volume, it's important to make sure you have this set at the correct time you want to start tracking your water. So here it is after pre-infusion, so it doesn't account for the 30 to maybe 60 milliliters of water that you've added on top for pre-infusion. So black and white, the water will only track water. The DU1 will only track the water after pre-infusion. You can change it to other steps, so after the blooming step or after the third pulse. But generally, you will just do for this preset after pre-infusion.